Mackenzie was making almost $50,000 an episode, and it was all going into her nose.
This is my crisis.
I started snorting cocaine, and then I started injecting cocaine, and then I started injecting heroin.
My father taught me how to shoot up.
I never thought she would make it to her 20th birthday.
Wherever she went, it's like driving past the accident that you have to look at.
I think throughout all of this stuff that she's gone through, I think is a survival instinct.
I've never known anybody who had so many lives and survived it as well as she did.
Alexandria, Virginia in the 1950s was a staid, middle-class suburb. But it was here that a little girl who would grow up in rock and roll's fastest lane, Laura Mackenzie Phillips, was born on November 10, 1959. Her mother, Susie Adams Phillips, was the daughter of a wealthy Baltimore horse breeder. Her father was an unknown songwriter named John Phillips.
He was a very sexy man, and he was quite forward. You know, he was very forward. He would not hesitate to pick up on a good-looking woman.
And marriage never altered that pattern. There were separations, and Laura Mackenzie was conceived during a one-night reconciliation. She joined a brother 2 years older named Jeffrey.
She was the funniest little thing. She was perfect. Actually, she was perfect. From the day I brought her home from the hospital, she did not cry. Mac didn't cry. She just was a perfect baby.
Laura was nicknamed Mac, short for her middle name, Mackenzie, which had been a grandmother's. The family was moving around the country while John performed with his folk group. Susie's blue blood parents had cut off all financial support to the young family, predicting their daughter's marriage to an aspiring folk singer would never work. They were soon proved right. The reason's name was stunning, blonde, 16-year-old Holly Michelle Gilliam.
And he just fell in love with Michelle. And I thought, well, it's an infatuation. She's like a babysitter to some people, you know, at 16 years old. And I think probably about 6 months later, he said, you know what a mistress is. He said, I want to keep Michelle as my mistress, and I'm going to keep you as my wife. And I said, you know what you can do with that, don't you? You can stuff it.
The marriage was over. 3-year-old Mackenzie and her 5-year-old brother went back to the Baltimore area with their mother, who worked as a secretary at the Pentagon to support them. But she made sure the children saw their father. John and Michelle married and were living in New York. His band, the New Journeymen, was performing in Greenwich Village. Mackenzie was often sent to visit.
And she was a little scrapper, but she had a lot of personality. And it didn't surprise me when she grew up to be an actress and a singer, because she always called, I remember we were shopping once at Saks in New York, and someone got into the elevator with us, and without being asked at all, she just turned and looked at them and said, my name is Laura and I'm a model. She was about 5.
John was training Michelle to sing, but they weren't getting many gigs. Evicted from their apartment, they fled to the Virgin Islands for a working vacation. Soon they were joined by the other half of what would become the Mamas and the Papas, Denny Doherty and Cass Elliot.
When Cass arrived, she arrived with a bottle of liquid LSD with a dropper, and we were living on the beach in tents. We were, well, for all intents and purposes, we were dropping acid and snorkeling.
Despite the daily diet of marijuana, alcohol, and psychedelics, John was cranking out new songs for the band. He sent for his 5-year-old daughter, and Mackenzie was allowed to go for what was supposed to be a short visit with the hippie tribe in the islands. She slept in her own little pup tent.
It was scary, and I remember scorpions and bugs, but I was, I was pretty into it because I was with my dad, and he wanted me around, and that was big for me. I remember sneaking into the town because there wasn't much food and there wasn't any money. And you remember the song Creaky Alley? John and Mitchie, that was all about that time. And it was living on American Express card, tents, low rents, and that was the whole deal. So my dad would send me to other camps on the beach to steal food.
I remember her coming back with a new pair of shoes once, and I thought, boy, this is getting out of hand. Somebody had bought her a new pair of shoes, some sailor.
5-year-old Mackenzie would go to a restaurant in town by herself and charm sailors out of breakfast.
And then one day my dad, some money came from the States and he took me in there for breakfast and the waitress said, "This is her 3rd breakfast today. Did you know that?" So that, I was learning some survival tactics very early.
John kept Mackenzie for 5 months without consulting her mother. She was frantic. Finally, Mackenzie was put on a plane home.
She was so dirty, and she just looked like a little waif.
Mackenzie's adventure with her father was over. John Phillips' band was broke and forced to leave the islands. But he had created a wealth of music. The band headed to California and were christened the Mamas and the Papas. Producer Lou Adler quickly signed them, and success was instant and enormous.
We met Lou, who we sang the whole first album for, and who liked it very much, and gave us enough money to buy some clothing and some food. And since then, it's been a perpetual income rise,
The Mamas and the Papas sound was a fresh, harmonic melding of 2 genres, folk and rock, lushly orchestrated.
All the leaves are brown, all the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray, and the sky is gray.
The winning formula would change the course of American pop music. John's songs may have romanticized hippie poverty, but by the time the Mamas and the Papas had top billing at the legendary Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, the band was overdosing on money. California Dreamin' and Monday Monday were among 9 songs in the top 40 in the next 2 years. Mackenzie's mother moved the family west to be near Papa John Phillips. When Mackenzie next saw her father, he was shopping for Jaguars with shoeboxes full of cash. His drug dealers were getting rich, but not his children or his ex-wife.
He didn't support me at all. Actually, I had him served at the Monterey Pop Festival, right on stage. I went to an attorney and I said, he's making millions and I'm getting nothing.
Mackenzie was shuttled back and forth between her parents, and despite the upheaval, was such a good student, her school skipped her a year. The earnest scholar became accustomed to finding the likes of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles in her father's living room, where there were bowls of marijuana on the coffee table. Mackenzie did what she could to get the attention of the distracted adults, and was delighted when she got it.
The night of the Hollywood Bowl show, Michelle decided that she would dress me in a tie-dyed T-shirt. It was like a dress. And she used pink thread and ice and a sewing needle and a piece of cork, and pierced my ears and hung peacock feathers from my ears. I was the mascot. I was like the little doll. Very happy to be playing this role because I was so starving for that acceptance, I just wanted my dad to want me around.
The life was thrilling, and Mackenzie determined early on that she wanted a career in show business too. From 1965 to 1968, the Mamas and the Papas ruled the charts. But Mackenzie's home life would soon fracture again. Papa John Phillips' drug use was spinning out of control. Then when John's wife Michelle had a brief affair with Denny Doherty, the dysfunctional Rock family spontaneously combusted. The band broke up in 1968, but the royalties were still rolling in, and so were the party favors. Mackenzie and her brother were doing LSD themselves by the age of 11.
We would sneak out at night and drop acid. And this was like when I was 11. I was smoking cigarettes, and certainly a lot of this was fueled by the fact that all this stuff was available every weekend at our dad's house.
I remember seeing mounds of cocaine on the coffee table. And I know that she saw it, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if she was helping herself to it at the tender age of 12 or 13.
But Mackenzie's mother's home was no haven of stability either. She had remarried, and the children were terrified of their new stepfather.
He hit me, he beat me. He was a very violent man. And actually, my children hated him so much that they left to go live with their dad. That's how bad he was.
At her father's house, by necessity, Mackenzie grew even more independent. She formed her own rock band with her friends, and in 1971, they performed at an amateur night at a legendary club called the Troubadour. A casting director spotted her.
I thought she, had something. I thought she was very cute and energetic and in control and very professional for such a kid. I think she was only 11 or something.
Casting director Fred Roos started suggesting Mackenzie for movie auditions, but she had no one to drive her, so he picked her up himself.
I remember going there to this house in, I think, Bel Air, and I didn't even meet any parents. Nobody came out and says, okay, here she is, She would just run out of the house and get in my car, and we'd go, and I'd bring her back. I never saw John or her. I don't think to this day I've ever met her mother. And her hair was usually ratty, like she didn't know how to do it, or nobody had taken care to get her prepped for an interview.
In 1971, Fred Roos found Mackenzie's first role in a very special script. Her first movie would be none other than American Graffiti. Thirteen-year-old Mackenzie Phillips made her screen debut in 1973, playing the equally precocious adolescent hitchhiker in George Lucas's American Graffiti.
Oh, no. You thought I'd tell you where I live? Not me. Not old Carol. The night is young, and I'm not hitting the rack till I get a little action.
Critics raved that Mackenzie was a natural, and no wonder.
Your heart went out to that kid in that car. It wasn't charisma, it was desperation. It was a teen lost, and that's what they captured in the movie. A teen desperately seeking attention who projected it on screen before anybody knew it was happening in real life.
In an omen of what was to come, Mackenzie next appeared in the widely watched TV movie, Go Ask Alice, about teenage drug use.
You got any uppers left? I don't know you. What's the matter? You're in a blackout. I brought you here.
Now it was Mackenzie's turn in the limelight, and she was determined to have at least as much fun as her parents had had, even if she was barely 14.
She was just wild. She asked me if she could go to the whiskey one night, and I said, sure, but you've got to be back by 1 in the morning. And I thought that for a 14-year-old, I was being rather liberal. And then she asked her dad, because she didn't like the response that she got from me. So her dad said, he said, yeah, you can go to the whiskey, but I want you home at 4 a.m. None of this dawn
Mackenzie was hungry for her father's attention, but she was in desperate need of some discipline. She spent her evenings partying on Sunset Strip with a much older crowd. Still too young to drive, she hitchhiked. When she was 14, she paid a terrible price.
Oh, many years ago, she told me, where she had been hitchhiking and she had gotten a ride from this man who then took her up to the hills and raped her. And then somewhere along the line let her out of the car. She told John after the fact, who then subsequently was ready to go gunning for the guy.
After the rape, Mackenzie got counseling, but her lifestyle changed little. She still lived with her father, who was now remarried to actress Genevieve Waite, and still there were no rules or structure in his home. Yet still, there were plenty of drugs. Television parts came Mackenzie's way, and she was now commanding more than $1,000 a week as an actress.
She took over as the star of the family, and there was nobody who could tell her not to do drugs because there were so many drugs in the house that it would seem a bit hypocritical.
Mackenzie spent her sophomore and junior years in high school frequenting nightclubs and discos, where she was welcomed through the velvet rope and served white wine in tall glasses. If authorities stopped in, the underage star was whisked out of sight by the owners.
Mackenzie was Miss Attitude. I remember when she was going out one night, seeing the guy that she was with, he was probably about 40 years old, balding with glitter over his eyes and platform heels, and she was in a skirt up to her crotch, and it just didn't look like this was a very healthy environment for her to be in. She had money, and she was very cocky.
One weekend in 1974, John Phillips and his new wife took off for New York for what they said would be a few days. They never came back. Mackenzie and her brother Jeffrey moved in with an aunt, John's sister Rosemary. The same year, Mama Cass Elliott died of a heart attack, and it seemed all John Phillips had left of those glory days were the royalty checks and the drugs. But Mackenzie's star was still rising. At 15, she made another movie, Rafferty and the Gold Dust Twins. And the next year, she would become even more famous.
That's not fair! You knew you were going to say that all along. That's not fair. You're not fair. I'm surprised you don't want me to wear a chastity belt. If there's a sale on them, we'll get one.
In 1975, she won the role of Julie on One Day at a Time, Norman Lear's popular sitcom about a divorcee raising two daughters alone. One Day at a Time co-starred Bonnie Franklin and Valerie Bertinelli and would become a top 20 favorite.
I had seen her a few years prior in American Graffiti, and I thought, oh no, she's too old and too tall to be my daughter. I mean, I'm this short drink of water. And then we met. And we both had these big teeth and big mouths, and I thought, well, it's going to work. And there was some kind of stuff that worked between the two of us. She was very out there, very open, and she was playing a troubled teen.
Mackenzie felt different from the start. The other actresses came from stable nuclear families, and Mackenzie was unaccustomed to so much normalcy.
We came from different places and came together and made a family, and Mac's feeling was, whoa, this isn't my world. Well, I don't know anything about this. On the other hand, family was very important to her. So family, regardless of whether she really had it or wanted it, here it was for her during this period of time.
Come on, Mom. Let me try. I mean, if I'm going to make a mistake, why don't you let me learn by myself? Okay?
Mackenzie hid behind her dark glasses and clothes, and others on the set attributed her erratic behavior to coming from a rock and roll family.
We only knew the Mackenzie that pulled herself together in the morning and came to work as a bubbly adolescent, played a wonderful character, had a lot of edge to her. She loved us all, we loved her back. We saw nothing of the other Mackenzie. She was play acting in life as she came to work in the morning and as she went out at night at home.
Mackenzie attended the Hollywood Professional School with Valerie Bertinelli, but when she made disparaging remarks about the school staff to a magazine, she was expelled. Yet her canny intelligence was apparent to everyone.
She was the smartest young woman, and I taught school, and I knew the difference between people acting smart and people who were smart. And it is her smartness, her deep intelligence that actually worked against her, because she was able to, because of her smartness, keep this act going for much longer than most people would think it could survive.
What her colleagues on the set had not yet realized was that Mackenzie was developing a severe dependency on cocaine. She was making close to $50,000 a week and had developed a $1,000 a week habit. Rarely did she make it to work on time. She managed to get away with it by sheer force of personality.
She had a way of coming in late, and she entered a room, and we all felt guilty that she was late. I don't know how she ever did that. I used to say, how did she manage to do that? And she'd be the one at fault, but she had a way of maneuvering the situation that the rest of us felt it was our fault.
Mackenzie bought her own house in Laurel Canyon, and now the only adult supervision she had was on the set. Her own mother was incapacitated by her abusive husband, and it fell to Mackenzie to rescue her from that situation.
Mac happened to call one night, and Leonard picked up the phone. He had beat me unconscious. Mac hung up the phone and called the police. Mac had a house in Laurel Canyon. So she said, Mommy, I want you to go there and contact an attorney and divorce him. So I did. It was that quick. She saved my life. She was about 18. She saved my life. Thank God. If it hadn't been for her, I would have been dead.
But Mackenzie could not save herself and had no one coming to her aid. Her public image as a healthy American teenager shattered the week of her 18th birthday. She was found sprawled semi-conscious on a Hollywood street and arrested for disorderly conduct while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. She was put on probation and sent into counseling, but continued at one day at a time. The rock and roll high life never missed a beat, especially when she visited her father in New York. An example of the lifestyle, one evening Mackenzie spent with Mick Jagger that she related years later to TV Guide. She has been asked about the dubious distinction of sleeping with the rock star ever since.
I'd known him since I was a kid. We were at a party, and we went to make tuna fish sandwiches with my dad, and Mick said, we have no mayonnaise, John, go get some mayonnaise. And basically my father left the room, the apartment. Mick locked the door and turned to me and said, I've been waiting for this since you were 10 years old.
It was just a fascinating story about drug use and Hollywood and the life of rock and roll, where people don't seem to care about anything, how old you are, whether you're, the daughter of a friend, it doesn't matter.
Mackenzie's relationship with her father would be a lifelong struggle and often seemed no warmer than that of any rock and roll star with a diehard fan.
She came to me one Friday and she said, Patricia, my dad is coming. My dad's coming tonight to see me. You have to save seats for him. I said, absolutely. What seats do you want? And she pointed to the seats in the audience. She wanted that one and that one. Okay. He might be a little late. He said he might be a little late. I said, not a problem. No one will ever sit in those seats. Those seats are for your father. And all night long, she looked out at those two empty seats. All night. It's an image that has stuck with me. I see her face. I see the sadness on her face, the disappointment, the expectation.
Many more expectations would be dashed before Mackenzie Phillips turned 20, and she still had a long way to go before she'd hit rock bottom. Mackenzie Phillips was just 19 in 1978, but the troubled young sitcom star was dating a much older, married man, 35-year-old Peter Asher, a successful record producer. Then, Mackenzie suddenly eloped with someone else, 25-year-old Jeff Sessler, who worked as a gopher for the Rolling Stones. Her shocked family and friends feared he was her drug dealer. Mackenzie had known him for just 3 weeks.
It was lust. It was drugs. It was love. It was me exercising my free will, and I just ran off.
Sessler denied he sold drugs. It wasn't necessary. Mackenzie had plenty of her own money for drug connections.
We had a connection. She had one and I had one. I think we used them both very well.
While away on their honeymoon, they watched on TV as her house in Laurel Canyon burned down in brush fires sweeping the Hollywood Hills.
And we were horrified. And so our life started in a turmoil, which was a perfectly good excuse to move down the road to the Chateau Marmont and get a bunch of drugs and deal with our pain.
Mackenzie's career was flaming out as well. Sessler wanted to make Mackenzie into a rock and roll singer, and he kept her up all night in drug-fueled recording sessions. Mornings, she struggled to get to the set of One Day at a Time. A cast that had once felt like family was coming unglued.
What happens when things do get bad is that when it doesn't work, it affects everybody. You know, you do work as a team when you're doing that kind of, when you're doing a family show.
Mackenzie didn't look like a wholesome big sister anymore. The cocaine had given her a constantly running nose, rotting teeth, and the 5'7" actress had dropped to 90 pounds. Producers had her wear pads under her clothes just to look normal. Mackenzie was full of excuses.
Or she was upset, or she wasn't feeling well, or she had a flu, or something was happening, whatever it was. We all got sucked into that life in some way. We all got sucked into enabling her behavior, all from love.
A good friend, her former co-star in American Graffiti, once took Mackenzie to a hospital after an overdose. It was one of many.
I don't know, there's something very magnetic about her, and no matter how bad she is or how stoned she ever got, I don't know why. I stuck with her. And I can think of other people that would be doing the same thing, and I would just like go, you know what, this isn't working for me. I would like leave them. But with Mackenzie, you just wound up putting up with a lot.
The producers agreed Mackenzie was suffering fatigue and ordered her to take 6 weeks off.
I mean, they cared, they knew there was a problem, but they did not understand how to deal with the problem at the time. I mean, she was, in a strange way, you know, a forerunner of how to deal with drugs in Hollywood. And they didn't deal with them correctly because they didn't know how to deal with them.
Mackenzie spent the time off going to the dentist, but not getting any help for addiction. And she was still performing for the cameras.
If you watch the camera that was not on her, the camera that was on her waiting for her to come back on the line, you could see that kind of slightly glazed thing, but the minute her camera came on, she was there. That's the smartness of Mackenzie.
She had this unbelievable ability to pull herself together, no matter how she felt, at any given second, and fool everyone. It was actually quite funny because she proved it to me in the beginning. She came to me and said, I feel like this, and she went into a total crying, and I went to hold her, and as I got close to hold her because I felt like she was really hurting, she turned around and started smiling at me. I said, that's how I can do it.
Finally, in February of 1980, that talented actress was called in for a meeting with the show's producers. Mackenzie actually believed she was going to get a raise. Instead, she was given a choice: quit or be fired. Stunned, she agreed to resign for personal reasons. 2 months later, her rushed marriage was over as well. Mackenzie's troubles were all over the press, and her humiliation was total. 1980 was not an easy year for the Phillips family. Next, Mackenzie's father was arrested for conspiracy to distribute narcotics and faced 8 years in prison.
I wasn't surprised. I had kind of known what was going on. I mean, there were huge bottles, pharmaceutical bottles, you know, of Quaaludes and Dilaudid and pills all over the house, and the lifestyle was deteriorating. There were needles on the floor and blood on the bathroom ceilings, and my father taught me how to shoot up. I remember he had his like half glasses on the edge of his nose, and he's looking down at my arm with the needle, and that was the first person that ever shot me up, and he taught me how to do it.
Hoping for leniency from the court, John Phillips entered a drug rehabilitation program, and Mackenzie joined him in her first attempt to get clean. The two became high-profile counselors themselves, work that earned John a light 30-day sentence. They seemed sincere.
After I got fired from One Day at a Time, I just remember sleeping half the day away, getting up, doing drugs, staying up the entire night doing drugs.
I was addicted, my wife was addicted, my son was addicted, and my daughter was addicted. We spent well over $1 million between us. One time I had 5 Rolls Royces, you know, and I sold them all one after the other, you know, at fire sale prices for drug addiction, you know. I sold everything I ever owned. I put it in my arm.
The father-daughter model of rehabilitation went on the speaking circuit together and appeared on television discussing their decline.
If you're taking drugs, try and stop and get help. And if you're not, don't start.
Don't
It's not worth it. It really isn't. It's not as glamorous as it's cracked up to be.
There was just one problem. The counseling program required that they detox from drugs, but allowed them to drink alcohol. After speeches, they'd get drunk with the other drug counselors. Now supposedly clean, in 1981, Mackenzie won her job back at One Day at a Time.
It was very hard. I think she was more nervous going back than when she first started when she was 13 years old when she was acting.
Well, I thought you finally grew up.
Oh, I've grown up all right. You're not the only one who's had a lover. It hurts, doesn't it?
She was drinking heavily, and Mackenzie had gained back far too much weight.
You're the most important thing in the world to me.
Oh, Max.
Within a year, Mackenzie returned to cocaine. Her co-stars were not mystified this time.
We're sitting in my kitchen, and she's sitting across from me, and she says, Lem, I know when I'm driving to get it, it's a mistake. I know when I'm paying the guy for a bag, it's a mistake. And I know when I'm doing it afterwards, it's a mistake. I cannot stop.
Mackenzie still wanted to hang out with her father, and she still wanted to be a rock and roll star. When her father formed a new version of the Mamas and the Papas in 1982, Mackenzie sang the parts of Michelle Phillips.
Sally said, Jenny, you know there are many who can sing a song the way that you do. Let's go stop her.
The band toured the country, but never achieved its former greatness.
And it was just such a mishmash. It was, and then they would sing One Day at a Time. It was embarrassing.
The producers at One Day at a Time now had a clause in Mackenzie's contract requiring drug tests on demand. And one day in 1983, Mackenzie passed out on the set.
Mackenzie's last firing was really dramatic. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that's a bad scene in a Danielle Steele movie, where the star is lying on the couch and the producer comes over and shakes her awake.
And she was very groggy. She really almost was incoherent. I said, Mac, I have to ask you for a urine sample. And she looked at me and she said, Patricia, if you wait until tomorrow, it'll be okay. Can you please wait until tomorrow? And I said, no, I can't. I'm sorry. And she sat up, pulled herself up, and she said, there's no point. I'll just leave. She picked herself up, and she left. And that's the last most of us saw her for a very long time.
Mackenzie was fired that very day. The cast was devastated.
That left a real pall over the cast. We didn't rehearse the rest of the day. I dissolved into tears. At that point, I realized this person now, I'm worried about her mortality. She just couldn't stop it yet. She wasn't ready.
At age 25 in 1984, Mackenzie was rolling up spare change to buy food and driving a car that had no reverse gear. It seemed an appropriate metaphor for her career.
This time, she appeared to most people in Hollywood to be gone for good. I mean, she was written off. There was maybe a second act for her, but after the second act, there was never going to be a third act. And that's how people in Hollywood thought about her.
Mackenzie Phillips only had 2 guest spots in 1985 and 1986, and then would have no more acting offers for the next 8 years. Mackenzie Phillips, the former child star, was 27 and an uninsurable outcast in Hollywood. In 1986, she fled to a town near Lake George, New York. Her father had settled there with his wife and their young daughter, Bijou, in an atmosphere that was a painful rerun of Mackenzie's childhood.
I would see lines on the table and like lots of bottles of alcohol and like, you know, needles here and there. And I was a little bit afraid of her, I think, just because of like her drug abuse was like so serious that even at that age I was like worried for her death. So I think I sort of felt like I don't want to get too close to this person that I'm probably not going to have for very much longer.
Mackenzie was living with the guitarist in her father's band, Shane Fontaine, and she was more heavily addicted than ever.
It was painful and dirty and You know, I suppose you get to a place where you keep thinking you hit bottom and then you keep going lower. You know, and then you find out that, you know, there's a new bottom.
It seemed bottom was finally here. Mackenzie was shooting cocaine daily, and she was pregnant. In the last months of her pregnancy, Mackenzie's father checked her into another rehab clinic.
They were preparing me for all kinds of devastation, and out came this beautiful, just light pouring from his eyes, this incredible child.
But even the birth of a son, Shane Jr., on February 3rd, 1987, could not show Mackenzie the light about her own addictions. She continued to shoot cocaine and drink for the next 5 years. Mackenzie struggled to take care of her young son, but the real parenting was done by Shane's father, who was also busy taking care of her. It didn't help that Mackenzie still toured with the retooled Mamas and Papas Act, staying close to fellow drug users and pushing others away.
No, she hid it from me. She hid it from a lot of people. And the personality was just not who I wanted to be around or have anything to do with. It was all lies at that point. That's how I would say it was all lies.
But Mackenzie deeply loved her son and knew she was failing him. Something had to change. Finally, in January of 1992, it did.
It wasn't working anymore. It wasn't giving me what it used to give me. You know, I would get high and the pain would still be there. The emotional pain of being. I knew that I was gonna lose my son. I was gonna die. There was nothing better coming. Nothing better coming. All I could see was more of the same.
She checked into the Alina Lodge, a rehab center in New Jersey where she remained for 9 months. She was 32 years old and finally facing her last 20 years of addiction. The strict clinic gave specific directions, such as listening before speaking. Finally, there were external rules that she would adopt into self-discipline.
She was learning to follow the rules. The first time, I mean, and this, follow the rules. I mean, there'd been no rules ever before.
Mackenzie was now clean physically, but she still had to reconstruct herself as a human being. Though Mackenzie and Shane's father had eventually made their relationship legal, the strain of the years of chaos proved too much, and they split up, sharing custody of their son. Mackenzie had no money left from her acting days, but acting was still one of her only job skills. She and her son moved back to Los Angeles for one last try and bravely started making calls to everyone in Hollywood who had known her when.
What had to be an extraordinary, humbling experience for her over and over again was walking into an office where an agent and/or manager forced that person, called every day to get Mackenzie back in there, and they don't want to see her. They're so not interested. Okay, all right, fine, I'll see her. And then she comes in, and you know what? I mean, the subtext, the bubble on the side of their head while Mackenzie's in the room is, I still don't give a damn about this girl. I'm sure she's just gonna be addicted again or cause a problem. I'm so not hiring her. I'll do this to get the agent off my back, but what a waste of my time.
In 1994, the hard work and humility would finally pay off, and Mackenzie would begin to rebuild her old self-esteem and her career. Mackenzie Phillips was 35 in 1994 and back on track. She had beaten the demons that destroyed her career and was drug-free and sober at last. But she was still bedeviled by her own reputation. She set out to make it right.
She called every person that she had hurt or alienated or offended or caused them financial problems, and she apologized to every one of them. And she said, you don't have to hire me, but I'm telling you I'm sorry for what I did to you, and I'm back. And that sort of act of contrition opened the doors for her in a way that I don't think she even realized.
After an 8-year hiatus from acting, her first big role came on Beverly Hills 90210 in the most ironic of roles, a drug counselor. More TV guest roles dribbled in, but in 1996, she took a role that proved something to herself, singing and dancing as Rizzo in a touring production of Grease.
It showed that she could be consistent and could be there every day and was there, and she loved it. She did need to prove to the world, to the producers, to all the people out there that said, oh no, she's just a druggie, that she wasn't, that she was serious, that she had finally grown up, in public or not, but she grew up for herself this time.
She humbled herself in front of Hollywood, and you know, Hollywood is just loves a champ. They love a Rocky story. They love a comeback. But this was a real comeback.
The personal comeback was in keeping with Mackenzie's character, passionate and public. She joined the national fight against drug addiction and was asked to tell her story on Capitol Hill.
Since getting sober, I have gone from being an unemployable person to working all the time. I have gone from being an irresponsible and unavailable mother to being an active and present and loving parent for my 11-year-old son.
Mackenzie's professional validation came when she auditioned for another television series of her own in 1999.
You watch all of these different people come in and they try their hardest, and then someone comes in and owns it. And everybody in the room felt the same exact way when she walked in that room.
Mackenzie scored the role of a singing and touring rock star, a widowed mother whose kids have a penchant for the paranormal on So Weird, another hit.
Fee, I can't explain what you saw, but I never doubted that you saw it.
The Disney Channel series has been described as The Partridge Family meets The X-Files. The storyline is as surreal as it is familiar.
My character, Molly, I get to be a strong woman on my own raising my children, which is what I do. I am a strong woman raising my son.
But playing at being a parent and being a parent are two different things, as Mackenzie Phillips knew very well.
Can I play a solo?
Yeah. Play whatever you want.
The raggedy child of rock and roll royalty would not let that happen in her family ever again. Now, she kept her distance from her troubled father.
She kind of had to overcome her family. And she finally did. It took her a long time, but she had to find in her own life and in her own heart something that was worth living for.
In the new life of Mackenzie Phillips, that was her son Shane, and he was worth it.
She's an adult. She's baking a cake for her son's birthday today. I mean, she's an adult woman, and you know, she has structure in her life, and she has safety and guidance in her life that she wasn't given. She wasn't given as a child.
I will always consider her a hero, knowing where she was and where she had to come from to get to where she is now. She's as soulful and deep and substantial and wise as anybody I have ever known. To be with her now is such a joy.
I look at her and I say, you are a miracle to me. Not only that you're here, but that we're speaking here at a pizza place, you with your kid, me with mine, all grown up, and we're here as a family, like regular people, ordinary people.
A teenager.